Hi, this is Dr. Kesselring, PhD. Every year on November 11th, I honor my grandfather, Michael Harris. He was a nice Jewish boy from New York, and he fought in World War I. I never knew him because he died years before I was born. But a number of years ago, my father gave me his war diary. And I handwrote everything out first because the handwriting is really small. And then I typed everything up. This is the diary. It flips me out. It's over 100 years old. And there's how small the writing is. Anyway, I always would email my co-workers when I was teaching so they could share this part of my grandfather's diary always on November 11th, which I don't think of as Veterans Day. I always think of it as Armistice Day because of my grandfather. Anyway, I'm going to start in his diary from Saturday, November 2nd. We stayed here until 3 p.m. after arriving at 7 a.m. Inside Dora Pullman's, we traveled to Commercy, where we learned that Turkey had given up. Arrived at Commercy at 12 midnight and hiked all night until 6 a.m. to a woods where we put up dog tents. We were about a half a mile from St. Michael's, and later in the morning of Sunday, November 3rd, I saw the big cemetery and lots of helmets, guns, etc. Both signs of war here, as we are now on the real Western Front. That night, left at 5 p.m., and at 9:30 we arrived in Warmby. Very tired. Went to sleep in a barn that held 250 men. On Monday, November 4th, woke up about 8 a.m. After breakfast, O'Brien and I walked over to the next town of Balgamon, where we had a feed with the heavy artillery. They were mostly from New York. That night, we started at 3:30, and after a terrible hike of 26 Ks, it sure was an awful hike on account of not being fed properly. We having had only corn willy and a half a cup of coffee. Since we started at 2 meals a day, we finally landed on the outskirts of Verdun, where we were billeted. I was up early the next morning and met Hayes, man, who worked at Eisman's. I sure was glad to see him. We talked over old times and etc. We had dinner together. In the afternoon, went over to Verdun, and it sure is a sorry-looking city. Everything is hit, and no civilians live here. We pulled out at 5 p.m. and walked 7 Ks to the front, just outside of Blumt. We relieved the 35th Division and went into their dugouts at Camp St. Airy. Saw big U.S. naval guns in action for the first time. Rather quiet here, as Jerry did not do much shelling. On November 7th, Jerry shelled us all day. 2 gas alarms that night. Report German envoys in Paris to discuss peace, but during the night the Hun pounded us with gas and O&E and shrapnel. On November 8th, we were shelled all day, and one hit our kitchen, knocking the stove out of commission and wounding quite a few men. We were told to look out for a man dressed like an American officer riding a white horse, spreading news of ceasefiring. Told to shoot on sight. Told we were going up over the top the next morning. Wrote letters to Emily, Midge, Racing, Home, and a few more. Up at 4 a.m. on the morning of November 9th. Rolled packs, and it was raining heavily. Began our attack at 6 a.m. Captured the first line, and one of our scouts, seeing some Germans dodge into a trench, told the lieutenant, He asked for volunteers and said we could have anything we found on them or in the dugout. I was one of five who were allowed to go. Crawling slowly forward, we came to the entrance. I was second man, and I sure was nervous, but Jerry gave up without a struggle. We captured 1 officer and 6 men. I jumped for the officer, who was wearing an iron cross. He also got an automatic pistol, which I later lost, as I did one helmet I took. They were very scared and said the war would be over Monday. We put them with the rest of the prisoners we were capturing. We captured the town of Molinville before 9 a.m., but was held up on account of machine guns before the town of Molinville. We had advanced quickly, however, that we ran far ahead of the artillery, so we had to do without their support. Before Molinville was captured, we advanced slowly on our stomachs, and I had many close calls. About noon, a Jerry plane flew over us and gave the Hun artillery our range. They knew all the ground here, and in about 20 minutes opened up a barrage that caught many of our men. But still, we advanced. Men were falling all around, and I crawled over many dead bodies. Well, actually, he says many dead men. However, we finally captured Molinville, killing 5 Jerry machine gunners and capturing 10. After advancing to the edge of town, it was beginning to get dark. We were told to stay out of the village as we were afraid the artillery would open up in that spot. All the buildings were ruined, and there were a few German dugouts there. After fixing a line of communication, it was about 6 a.m. I went to a shell hole and lay in it all night. How we escaped, I don't know, as shells were breaking all around us. In the meantime, our artillery, which is the 35th Division, came up closer, but not far enough. The stretcher bearers worked all night, carrying all the wounded. About 5 a.m., Jerry sent over gas, which caught quite a few of us. I had my wet mask on in time and only had about a whiff of it. Lucky for us, it was not mustard gas. They counterattacked at 7 a.m., but we drove them back with heavy losses on the morning of Sunday, November 10th. We went after them immediately and drove them still further back to the next town, Hulan. It sure began to look like a fine day, but my feet felt frozen on account of getting wet the day before and the cold night. At 9 a.m., their artillery opened a terrible fire. Christie, our sergeant, was hit by shrapnel when a shell landed on top of a shell hole. Sojols, he and myself were in. It was a slight wound on his hand, and we fixed it up. Carr was killed, Brooks badly wounded, being a bad wound in his arm. Burke wounded in the leg and hand, Collard in the stomach. Captain of A Company killed. Sergeant Murray gassed, as was about a dozen others all around me. Were it not for the soft dirt the shells landed in, many more of us would have been hit. I was also surprised at the large number of duds. About 5 shells broke within 5 feet of where 3 of us were and did not go off. However, while answering the phone with Park, Sergeant Christie, and Hickson, a shell broke about 15 feet away. Unfortunately, Parks got hit in the leg with a piece of shrapnel, and Perry Sayers and myself rushed out to bring him in. We were under continual shell fire all the time, carrying him in, and we had to walk through a stream of water up to our knees to get him out of danger temporarily. We got our first aid out and did the best we could until the stretcher bearers came and took him away. It was a serious wound, and we heard he died 5 days later. After taking the next town, we were driven out on account of the intense artillery fire of HE and gas. At about 1 p.m., we heard we were going to be relieved at 5. I was certainly happy because we had nothing to eat since early Saturday morning, and only those who had water in their canteens were fortunate to have water, and up until this time, no idea how long we were going to remain on the offensive. At about 4 p.m., after the afternoon had slowly passed with about one shell every 5 minutes breaking around us, we heard the advance guard of the 321st coming in. The Hun must have been watching for reserves, as when the main body came up, they gave us one of the worst barrages I've ever seen or heard. It was a murderous fire. Every inch of ground was hit, and no two in the same place. 2 shells fell at Crawford and mine's heads, but fortunately for us, they did not explode. If they had, I doubt we would have come out alive. I might have been less wounded. It was a terrible sight to see so many of our boys getting hit, coming out and also going in. It was slaughter, but the boys kept right ahead. Crawford and I were finally relieved by the 321st boys, and I could see that they were worried. C and I had only gone about 100 yards when a shell fell about 20 yards from where we had been relieved, and Sergeant Charles was wounded in the back. Had we been there 5 minutes longer, I may have been hit. I walked back to the Reg PC and then out to a field where the kitchen camp was, and we had lots of steak, bread, and coffee. We were all hungry and tired, and after feeding, went to sleep in the field. We were up early the next morning, November 11th, and at 9 a.m., it was announced that the war was finished, and we were happy when on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the cannons stopped roaring. Thank you for listening. I hope that some of you find some inspiration from this. And, I look at the picture of my grandfather as a young man, and it breaks my heart to know that he went through so much horror. And his only vice his whole life, even after witnessing all of that, he was a gambler. But sometimes I feel like I feel him with me, like right now. And he's glad that his great-granddaughter is keeping his legacy alive. Thank you so much. Happy Armistice Day.